I'm not sure that I would have found any place for myself on the planet without it. I had a long time with no direction, energy, impetus, sense, any of that stuff, and food gave me that.
Mark Diacono found his purpose and direction through food, and he has dedicated his life to growing it, cooking it, and writing about it. He has a powerful personal story to tell, and he shares it with us on this episode of Food Matters. Welcome back to Food Matters. I'm GIY founder Mick Kelly, and throughout this series, I'm meeting the people who are reconnecting us with real, healthy, sustainable food. They tell us why food matters to them and why it should matter to you too. Mark Diacono is a prolific food writer, grower, photographer, and cook. He was involved in the early days of River Cottage, and then in 2004, he created Otter Farm from 2 blank fields in southwest England, turning it into a groundbreaking 17-acre smallholding, which he called a climate change farm, due to its incredibly diverse, weird and wonderful range of edible plants in orchards and forest gardens. Mark has so much to say about food, how it has transformed his life, and why it can be a transformational force for all of us.
We're so very much sold how not to enjoy that experience to its fullest and its most life-enhancing by people who want to take from us, that it becomes an act of kind of rebellion, of resistance to go, I'm going to eat food that will give me a longer, happier life. And so I got involved quite early in River Cottage, and it was such a place of interesting people doing interesting things and kind of creative minds, you know, and the Steve Lambs and the John Wrights and the Gil Mellors and Ray the Butcher, you know, phenomenal people who really had so much going on in their minds.
We've had new potatoes for about a week now. I've had them every night. I ate so many last night, I got a pain in my side from...
the spud stitch.
Exactly.
It's like being
exactly
sent out
what it
for,
was.
Yeah, it's like being sent, you're going, oh, that's what cross-country felt like. Oh.
Yeah.
Now, as someone who ekes out a book every, 25 years or so, I have always been in awe of Mark's ability to churn out so many great books. Every time I look around, it seems like there's a new Mark Diacono book on the shelves of our bookstores. So I started our chat by paying homage to his unbelievable writing talents.
You're very kind. One secret to that is make it a crap book. And no one will know. No, I can't stop writing. Now I've discovered this kind of love for it.
Yeah.
It sort of does a lot of things for me, and I can't stop writing. I find I've got a lot to say, but also it's a part of the thing that helps me make sense of the world and myself. And it's not a kind of moon around my planet. It's part of the planet, if you know what I mean. And that's really important to me. You know, a lot of people like yourself who write food-related books, you know, they're busy with, you know, really time-consuming business, or they're busy on other initiatives and all of that. And it's a different thing for me, I think. It's sort of at the heart of how I live, and I can't quite work out how and why it got to that point, but I'm very happy because I was never really sure that I would find something that I love, you know.
Yeah.
And writing is certainly a big part of that.
So I think I'm going to need a new shelf for the Mark Diacono section of my vast book collection, particularly my vast food book collection. But you know what? And I'm not blowing smoke here, right? That I think, like most people, I've lots of food books, and I've lots of food books that I haven't looked at since I bought them. But yours are sort of on the bookshelf in my kind of office that I can get to easily, or, and this is the great compliment, they're either right beside the washing machine in the utility room where, you know, the really useful books for recipes and things are. And you've had some absolutely magic ones, like The Year in Otter Farm is a must read for us and very regularly used for recipes. Same with sour and, you know, herbs. Like, you've had an incredible collection, I suppose, and it feels like a tour through the whole world of food, I suppose. And then when I heard that you'd done a book on vegetables, I was just like cheering, because it feels like that's the book you were destined to write in many ways, because you absolutely love veg. Like, that's come across in all of your writing over the years. What was your motivation, Mark Diacono, for writing this particular book?
It was almost too obvious to see. And I'm one of those gormless blokes who, you know, is constantly looking behind the gorgeous person in front of you for your wife. I'm constantly looking past the obvious woods for a tree. Growing veg was really how I got into all of this, how I got into growing, how I found something that I wanted to be doing with my life. And immediately, as soon as I saw the most obvious thing to be writing about next, it sort of quietly felt like coming home, if you know what I mean. I've written a lot about growing veg, and obviously many people kind of, if they're looking for, I don't know, the planting distance of broad beans, they're just going to pick the phone up, And I felt like maybe I didn't need to communicate any more of the sort of practical side, but I did feel like I had a lot to say about how we might be eating it, And it was, there were a few things that went through my brain really early on when I was thinking about the book. Years ago, I was helping a friend clear an allotment. There was a guy there, older fella, who'd obviously been there a long time. He was talking to us about how long he'd been there. He was happy to see my friend there. Just when we finished clearing some stuff, he brought us both a bag each, carrier bag. I looked inside. They're really amazing turnips, and I love turnips. And they're really hard to grow well, because the slugs love them and whatever else. And they were perfect. And I said, "What are you doing giving these away?" He goes, "I don't like them." And I was like, "What do you mean you don't like? Why have you got
Why did you grow them?
Yeah, well, you got to grow turnips, was his answer. And it was really interesting to see that even in somebody, and I don't think this is, there are a lot of disconnects here, aren't they? When it comes to vegetables, what do we eat? We're so distant from our landscape, from the people who grow our food, from the nature of what food is and all of that. But even here with somebody who had been doing it forever, there was a sort of part disconnect between what they were growing and what they were eating. And one of the things I really wanted this book to do was to, I guess, two big things. One was to be going, right, I want it to be the answer on a wet Wednesday in November when you want a delicious tea, but you don't want to spend your lifetime making it. Out of what's in season, what's around now, what's cheap, what's plentiful, what's absolutely highly nutritious and all of that. But I also wanted to have a whole load of recipes you can make a friend of and then go, okay, I could make that in January with purple sprouting, or I could use chicory in October, or I could be using asparagus in May, And I just wanted maybe that book to be, 25 odd years of ways I found of turning something delicious, whether you've grown it or got it from the shop, seasonal, delicious, nutritious, gorgeous food. And it just felt like maybe I hadn't done that I'd been circling around it in lots of ways, and that I'd alluded to it, and that I'd had, there were lots of hints of this and lots of maybe even kind of direct elements of that, but nothing where I'd brought all that together. And that's why I wanted to make it a really recipe heavy book and not so much, about the growing. So there's an implication that you've stepped into the house, either from the garden, from the allotment, or from your greengrocer, or from your nearest supermarket,
It strikes me just as you said that, and I often think when you look around, we've sort of settled into this kind of mono diet where we eat the same things all year round. Like maybe if we're eating healthily, it's because we feel like this is a healthy diet. And the supermarket is a place where there are no seasons in many ways, which is a kind of miracle of logistics, but it's an entirely different way of eating to being led by what's in your garden or in your community. Has that influenced your thinking? Because obviously it feels like that's a hugely important part of this. It's eating what food that's at its most nutrient dense and its freshest and most flavoursome and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because what we've got here is it can be kind of caricatured as kind of two ends of the spectrum, the kind of Greg's eating kind of high carb, eats no fresh, whatever, to the guy with organic smallholding over here, and there's nothing in between. But I think any way that we can drag people happily towards, healthy, delicious, delightfulness, that also is wildly easy on the pocket. And all of these things, is kind of crucial. So I think much as I would love it if people bought only from local producers and stuff, the big thing for me is the mind change. It's the mind change. It's not about adopting all of the kind of things that you might over this side, which is a really crucial thing. If you can just switch people on to the idea that what's in their shop now is the best thing to be eating, that it's the cheapest thing, and deliciousness is often the way of doing that. To see how brilliant a celeriac is, that it's not in any way inferior to a tomato, that, chicory is every bit as lovely as asparagus, and that we are kind of led down a kind of road by other people who with, other interests at their heart. And that's really important, I think.
Yeah, like what came to mind as you were saying that is the avocado. Like, how did we decide that an avocado shipped from the other side of the world, God knows how long ago it was taken out of, it was harvested, is better for us than, as you say, celeriac or whatever is fresh and available. Like, this idea of a superfood has a lot to answer for, doesn't it?
It really does. And again, we're quite good at looking at things in kind of little silos, we kind of understand things, we're busy and all of that stuff. So we kind of go, oh, it's a superfood, therefore I'll eat it. And it's a bit like sort of looking after your hand while your foot's being chewed off. We're not looking at the bigger picture. And that's kind of understandable. This is where I get a little stuck, Mick, because it feels to me like we're asking too little of those in power. We need a reimagining of how we want to live. We need a reimagining of our food system. We need a reimagining of what we as people want from our lives, And we've all been sold, I was remembering really back to when I was a kid at school. And my dinner money was really for two things. It was for records and sweets. Both made me very, very happy indeed. But it really reminded me of how much, even then, decades ago, we were being quietly sold the joy of sugar. That vegetables were odd things. I was 17. I remember clear as day, one of my friends, I was meeting him in town and I was waiting for him, sitting on this seat waiting for him and right in the middle of town. And he came out of the greengrocers with a bag of satsumas. And he may as well have come out with a koala. I was like, what are you doing? I literally couldn't understand what was going on. Still my favourite definition of working class is there's fruit in the house and no one's ill, and that's how it was, So we're not talking about something new here. We're just talking about something that we maybe understand a bit more now.
So in the introduction to vegetables, you talk about us being overfed and undernourished. I guess it's linked to that, right? Why do you think that is?
We've got to be a little bit gentle on ourselves because we're constantly sold this idea of consuming, of saving time that you can more usefully spend on other things that so our diet reflects that. It's high in carbs, sugars, salts, low in fiber, low in fruit, low in veg. Essentially, it's low in all the things that our body desperately needs. And we get used to being full. That's a privilege that many people don't have. Let's not underplay that. But that is only what we ask of our diet. We ask it just to be the fuel that allows us to carry on with our otherwise consuming life. And I think it's at the heart of what we want to be as humans, What do we want next? And really, vegetables are this kind of like a golden skewer running through a lot of the issues that we have in our societies now. We're talking about health, we're talking about sustainability, talking about pressure on NHS, we're, forming habits as children that not only become habits that we persist with for the rest of our lives, but laying down the foundations for ill health, shorter lives, lack of vigor, vitality, not maintaining or even acquiring to start with any sense of your kind of potential, The solution seems so simple. Eating what grows really well in your country, predominantly in season. It's so simple, and yet we're trying to find peculiar ways of dealing with it. Like I say, I think a lot of the problem is that we need to just look a little bit about what we want from ourselves as a species. Here in England, we've got an election coming up, and so little is being talked about important issues, You look at almost anyone who's likely to come into power, and they're spending all their time talking about increased growth, increased consumption, and I'm not saying that there are, clearly there are a lot of societal inequities that need to be put right. And some of that involves improving people's ability to kind of live and all of that stuff. But I think we're disconnecting many issues that are wildly connected, and that the solutions maybe are more holistic than that.
So do you think that, like, the Michael Pollan line about or the manifesto of eat food, mostly plants, like, do you think that's the solution, or is it more nuanced than that? Because I've been thinking a lot about that sort of spectrum from ultra processed foods at the one end,
Mm.
the high carb, high fat, salt, sugar kind of things that you talked about, and then regenerative food grown in living soil at the other end. And like, let's be honest, like a carrot can be right at the end of that spectrum at the good end, or it can be somewhere in the middle potentially if it's grown conventionally and, using chemicals and fertilizers to grow it in dead soil and so on. Would your manifesto be like eat more veg, or do you think it's like it's important how the veg is grown? Is that
No,
too
I think
complicated a
no, I
message?
don't. It's really interesting that, isn't it? Because this lovely thing of the law of diminishing returns. You want to make your biggest win, and from there build. And so I think that thing about eat food, mostly plants, not too much. There's an awful lot of good sense in there.
Yeah.
I'm really attached to this thing that it's to do with the mind change. So one of the things we've always talked about is trying to help people and encourage people and inspire people to grow even a little of what they eat. It doesn't have to be self-sufficiency, because what happens if you grow a little bit of your own food is that you immediately, it forces itself upon you that you cannot care about where the rest of your food comes from. So even if you grow some herbs by the back door, you become aware. If you grow some spuds, you're going, well, okay, why are these so much better than what I buy in the shops? You're almost bound to be more interested in where the rest of your food comes from. Who grows it? How are they growing it? And so you get more inquisitive. And, I know it can be a great mistake for the middle-aged white man to extrapolate his experience onto the rest of the world, but it's not an unusual reaction to all of this, to growing a little bit of your own food, to find that your life is enriched, that you do care about where the rest of it comes from. And though all of the things that ripple out from that one decision, grow some spuds, grow some carrots, it naturally involves you more in what you're eating, which naturally involves you more in the environment from which it comes, and the livelihoods and the environments of those involved in the rest of your diet. So I think that's a pretty good manifesto. It isn't the whole thing. You're absolutely right. Having a carrot that's grown, sprayed to bits, that's, highly nitrogened from endless miles away is clearly a very different carrot to the one grown from down the road. But if you have an excellent carrot, and before that it was a pasty, then it might be that you are along the spectrum somewhere and become more inquisitive. And that's where I think is the fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. It's progress, not perfection, I suppose. Probably say, yeah. So I guess it comes down to then, like, how much have you embraced vegetarianism or eating more plants in your life? I mean, have you been on that journey yourself?
From kind of late-ish teens, I was a vegetarian for about 17, 18 years.
Okay.
And then, and interestingly, that changed when I decided to keep pigs. And it's interesting. One of my oldest friends, he says very little of sense, but one of the things he did say was, in the end, Mark, everybody loves Fleetwood Mac. And this is a great tale of the kind of progression into middle age. But I worry about things that I sort of really think aren't for me, because I end up taking them on, and I wonder, I think it's really possible that I might sort of adopt a vegan diet at some point in my life, only because I'm really inquisitive about, but I can't get the answers to the questions. The reason I started eating meat again, having been a vegetarian, was that I felt like there were more gains to be had by eating the right meat from the right place. I've never been able to satisfy myself enough to give up eating the right meat from the right place, to get answers to things like what happens to the South Downs? What happens to those arrested environments that are there and on which a wild amount of wildlife that dependent on, say, a grazed landscape, which is why I'm using that example. What happens to that? Do we let that go? Do we lose those species, or do we eat a little meat, but a really good meat, inverted commas, so it felt really natural to eat meat again from the right places, especially if I was raising the animals myself, because it felt like it was part of the same questions, just that the answer had changed. What's the best thing that I can eat in my situation, in my environment?
Where are you at now? Are you eating some meat now, or are you mainly?
Yeah, I eat a little, but I really like, it is such a pleasure to be throwing myself more than I did. I mean, this is the great thing about writing a book, is that you have the excuse to throw yourself more at something that you would have liked to have thrown yourself at, and maybe you part through yourself at. So I definitely eat more. I mean, I would have liked to have written this book just for myself, Mick, because there are so many great vegetable cookbooks around, vegetarian cookbooks around, but so many of them are brilliant sides and wonderful accompaniments, and with some main courses. And this is almost main courses, entirely main courses, because that's what I felt I wanted all the time, and I felt like other people wanted all the time. That's been the joy of it. So I very much enjoy eating a huge amount of veg. Fruit, obviously, is another pleasure in my life. But I do eat a little meat. But I do wonder. It's a sort of, I'm not one for joining the kind of meat is bad and all veg is good. It is more nuanced than that. But sometimes we need sort of simpler messages. But I think the right meat from the right place has a lot going for it if you are minded that way.
Yeah. Like I had a year off meat, right? I think we're quite similar in that respect, that I'm a kind of an all-in kind of a person, right? When I go all in, I'm all in, and I gave up meat for a year. I'm like a skinny guy anyway, right? But I lost like about 2 stone weight. You could blow me over with a feather. I was gone so thin, and it really highlighted for me. Now, that's not really why I went back to eating meat, and I'd be the same as you. I think when I do eat meat, it's very, hopefully from a very good source or reared myself or whatever. But it got me thinking a lot about the difficulty of getting like the right nutrients into your body when you're, even just that basic, like having some, trying to get enough protein into your diet. Like, were you thinking about that when you were writing this? If it's all main courses like that, how do you have a diet that's mainly plant based, that's also, nutritionally appropriate, I guess, or were you more focused on, the flavor and the fact that it's veg in its own right as a main course?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's really interesting as well. Your experience mirrors about half the people I know who have become vegetarian, and the other half go really carb heavy and end up putting weight on because they're really carb heavy. And it's quite interesting. I think it's definitely worth having a little think about before. But yes, there's a lot in here where I'm using lots of sources of protein. So there's a fair amount of chickpeas, a lot of beans, and there is cheese. But there are lots of swap outs for people who are, gluten-free, vegan, dairy avoiders, and so on. So there's a lot of thought about that in there. But I do think if diversity is the key, you need a good amount of protein, you're right. And it's just making sure that goes in there. And if you're going to become a vegetarian or want to have a healthy vegetarian diet, then you certainly need to be thinking about, I would say that's the big question, because you're unlikely to be shy of greenery. You're unlikely to be shy of fiber, all of that stuff. If you're throwing yourself at it and you're eating enough vegetables in it, you're not just, moving towards, 2 tons of pasta with some tin pesto in it, I've tried to get some balance across the book, where, don't get me wrong, Mick, there's a lot of potatoes rolled around in something absolutely delicious, that are going to make you very happy, because that's what you need on a wet Wednesday in December, when you didn't want to cook. But there's plenty in there that's, that's got the protein, that it's got all of the stuff you need,
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. So, like, what sort of surprised you then, I guess, about like putting these recipes together and putting the book together? Like, what did you find out that you didn't know beforehand?
One thing that was really a really conscious effort was to be, a lot of the recipes in there are traditionally meat based. So there's a Jansen's temptation in there, which is essentially a bit like a potato dauphinoise, where you've got whatever the root veg is, and it's often potatoes, thinly sliced, cream, garlic, all of that stuff. And in the middle is a kind of anchovy, oniony base. Traditionally, that's what it is. A big consideration in the book all the time was going, right, if I want to make that, and I do like to make that, and it's one of the holy grail, Mick, at our age is, we used to have all of these things we wanted from life, but actually all we're after now is a 2-night tea, and you cook once, you got 2 nights off it. And the Jansen's temptation. Yeah, we used to want to travel the world. We used to.
Yeah.
Now just give me an easy tea.
Just a night off cooking.
Yeah,
would be nice.
A night off cooking, wouldn't it? The joy. And there are quite a few recipes like that where I'm going, that's what I'm after. But how do I keep out the anchovies? How do I savory this thing up? How do I make it as, really pleasing on that kind of whole umami thing as the original? So there was a lot of messing around with mushrooms, with miso, with seaweed. The dried seaweed you can get even in most supermarkets now. And there was a lot of playing with those kind of things to get the bottom end, so that everything, of course, I want lots of light, bright lemon, coriander, zing, fantastic. But there's sometimes, you just want some heartiness. You just want that savoury bottom end. So there was a lot of playing with those other things that you could bring in. And that was most certainly one of them. So I would say that was interesting. It was good fun playing with those ingredients and also playing with different kinds of chili, different bits of pepper, things like chipotles. There's sort of implied savouriness with smoked food. And, smoke brings savouriness. So there's some dried chipotle flakes in there. Obviously, you can use other chili flakes if you want. But that little bit of savouriness all the time was often where I was going, just slightly getting the onions to vaguely think about going brown without going brown. And that just meant that you get that savoury satisfaction that you need sometimes.
That's great. Where does this expertise come from that you have around kind of flavors in particular? Like it was so apparent to me reading your book, Sour, and throughout your books, just that understanding of how to put together the different flavors to make a dish really pop. Like, where does that come from? Because it's very chefy in a way, and you do it.
You're kind.
You do it in such a lovely way that it doesn't come across as arsey or chefy. But I don't mean arsey chefy, but like, you know what I mean? Where does that expertise come from?
Well, you're very kind. Most of it is, it's like writing a song, Mick. You don't play every one of the crap ones. Honestly, there are still a lentil and rhubarb curry in my head.
Yeah.
That won't quite make it to the table in any way that people want to eat it. I'm sure there's a rhubarb curry in there somewhere. I'm slightly concerned that such is its status in my brain. That's the day I die. It will be the day that I make this. I'll be like, yes, and then fall over.
Yeah.
But that's mostly what it is. I'm just very inquisitive. And again, I think a lot of that is just having done so many crap jobs, having lived quite a lot of my life without any direction, ambition, or energy, to have found something, growing, cooking, eating, writing, that I couldn't love more, that makes sense of being alive on this planet for a short time. I remember when I started doing any of this, Mick, and it was sort of accidental. It was just as a hobby, something to do while I was doing other things. That when it just started to look like maybe people were reading what I wrote, because I started a blog online, all this stuff, that the one thing I wouldn't do ever was pretend that I knew what I didn't, because I've had to do that so often in crap jobs that I haven't enjoyed. You have to pretend you know more than you do, and it's just a good way of making yourself unhappy. It's the foundation of a political life most of the time, isn't it? Not that I was a politician, but I think that's a lot of it. Is just throw yourself at it. There's no point telling people about that shit recipe for something that you made, and just keep working, because there's always a germ. There's always a germ where you're going, okay, that's disgusting, but you grow some ordinary lettuce. Next year, you've learnt enough to come back and grow some better lettuce, and that may be the hardest challenge, especially for a man, because we're brought up to believe we should be perfect.
Yeah.
We're people who pull rabbits out of hats for our children, and they worship us forever because of it. And it's a load of old
yeah.
Whereas
not when they get to the age my kids are at, I can tell you that.
No, we're the figures of fun now, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. Or contempt, one or the other. So you should see the way my teenage daughter looks at me right about now, and you'd know what I mean. But anyway, that's a whole other podcast.
A quick one. Now, I know you get asked on almost every podcast these days to hit that follow or subscribe button, but they never really tell you why that's important. Simply put, if you hit the follow button, it helps us to grow the show, get more great guests, and to reach more people just like you. So it's a small gesture from you that means a huge amount to us. Thanks. Now back to the episode.
Let me just change gears a little bit and ask you, right, you've been involved in two of what I think are two of the great things that have come out of England in the last decades, one of which is River Cottage, obviously, and the other is Otter Farm, which was your own project, which was extraordinary. And can you just tell us a little bit about those two experiences, I suppose, and how they've kind of brought you to where you are now? And maybe just for people that don't know about what you did in those two projects.
Thank you, Mick. That's very lovely of you. I mean, I'll do them in the wrong order, actually. I'd started Otter Farm before I was involved with River Cottage, but I was involved very early with River Cottage in a kind of funny way, in that I got involved in helping running their website, and then they wanted to film some stuff because I'd started growing unusual things at my small garden I just bought. And then the head gardener left, and I was asked if I'd run a course or two, and da-da-da. And so I got involved quite early in River Cottage, and it was such a place of interesting people doing interesting things and kind of creative minds, and the Steve Lambs and the John Wrights and the Gil Mellors and Ray the Butcher, phenomenal people who really had so much going on in their minds and so many kind of creative inquisitivenesses. So, River Cottage kind of went from being a kind of interesting, fun series on the telly into having a headquarters where there were lots of courses run from and all of that. And I was involved with that and helping with all of that kind of thing. And I guess the thing that really struck me from that, when I was a kid, my dad and I lived together from kind of 9 to 19, and it was a feast of cheap meat and, onions. And it really was, and it was interesting. The first kitchen I ever worked in, I was just washing up and stuff. And it was it was an outdoor education centre, and kids would come down from Bristol to the south coast of Devon. And I remember seeing this girl, who must have been 8, 9, maybe 10, stood in the middle of the field looking down across the cliff out to sea. And she was just stood on her own. And I kind of walked down and said, "Are you all right?" And she sort of said, "Is that the ocean?" I was like, yeah. And she'd never seen it before.
Wow.
And she came from Bristol, a few miles from a bit of coast, and it really struck me. But it also really struck me at the same time that, of course, I would have exactly the same reaction had I been plonked into the middle of Bristol at the age of 8 and expected to understand what I was seeing. And what really stunned me at River Cottage, I think, because we had so much access to schools groups, to people coming down, was how very, very disconnected, very, very disconnected. It was a reminder of how disconnected I'd been, but that it was still like it, was how many people were disconnected from where food came from. You'd have school groups and people could not understand that potatoes come out of the ground. Just like, the very, what we would consider now obvious to us. That was really striking. And it was really interesting because you might spend a lot of your life with people who are not wildly dissimilar to you, and it was a real reminder. There were and are still a great many people who grow up very similar to how I did. That kind of environment of local authority, accommodation, poor diet, no understanding of what a good diet is, apart from being full, all of those things. And how important it was to be able to try and even wave a small flag or encourage people towards, amazing food. And at the same time, my Otter Farm thing, I still don't quite understand it. I ran a business where I was advising local authorities and government agencies about managing the countryside on a kind of national level. And it was quite nice. And I ate mulberries for the first time when I was in Suffolk. When I was doing that, I was doing the landscape assessment of Suffolk with a team. And mulberries happened to be in season. A friend had a mulberry tree. I ate them. I'm like, why isn't this a part of the national diet? And it's like, well, they don't suit the supermarket system. It's that simple. They fall to bits under the weight of their own gorgeousness before you can get them onto the shelf. And I'm like, well, I've got to grow some of these. And literally, as gormless as that sounds, that was a huge impetus behind trying to get a bit of land just to be able to plant some mulberries. I remember my wife saying, we've got this fucking ridiculous mortgage, Diacono. What the hell are you doing with it? And the only answer I could think of was mulberries. And
it's not a brilliant answer, is it? I mean...
It's not a business plan, is it? and I see you what, I huffed off to the bath with Jane Gregson's fruit book, because I was thinking, well, okay, well, if I'm going to plant mulberries, I better figure out how I'm going to use them, for other recipes for them. So I was looking through it, and I went to turn to mulberries, and I accidentally turned to medlars, which is right next to it in the book. And I'm like, medlars, I've read about them somewhere. And literally the penny dropped. It was like, aha, I've just grown some salsify the year before, which is this kind of other kind of forgotten, gorgeous root veg. It just started this little personal manifesto of like growing food that's been forgotten, because often it's just because it goes beyond the supermarket system. It's utterly delicious still. And so I started doing that. And then I started looking at other things, because I was obviously my environmental background. I was looking at climate change, and there were a few things coming together, and it just dawned on me. I'll tell you what, I shouldn't tell you this because this will dilute my brilliance in your mind, but I'm prepared to do that.
Nothing could do that, Mark.
Well, thank you, mate.
I mean, I've just heard you tell the story about being in the bath and fucking, the amazingness of alphabetical order. Like, honestly, how could I not think you're a genius?
Honestly, that's the tragic truth, isn't it? It's ridiculous. At this point, I'd come across Martin Crawford, who has the most astonishing food forest in Dartington in South Devon. And I realised that maybe perennial growing, away from monocultures into polycultures was a way to go. And I was inquisitive about lots of the plants that might do it. But it then occurred to me in a kind of big leap that if we could take advantage of the climate change that we were already committed to, even if we got good from tomorrow, then maybe there were lots of marginal things like almonds, peaches, apricots that might work in this country. Now, if I could show that we could grow them here, maybe that would be an inspiration to some farmers to be growing that in a kind of agroforestry way. So they might have peach orchard underneath which they carried on grazing sheep, or whatever they were doing normally. If we can produce that in this country, the vast majority of the carbon, embodied water, all of that stuff that comes with those fruit that we normally import. So, and by doing that, we might actually reverse the acceleration of climate change by taking advantage of the climate change that we'd already committed to. The bit that I would like you to think was my idea, but it actually wasn't. I was on the phone to somebody from a newspaper who was chatting to me about the idea I'd had. So it's like a climate change farm. And I'm like, yes. It's like a climate change farm. Scribbling it down. Yeah, exactly. So I owe that to a journalist from The Guardian or something who made that leap, and I cut him off immediately and went, right, that's it. That's my idea. But yeah, so it really was all of that. So and I threw myself at it. It was, and honestly, some of these things were absolutely on a glorious whim. A guy who worked with me on the farm a day a week and moved to Canada, and my daughter's like, where's Trent gone? And we literally just bought her a globe, and I'm going, that's where Trent is, on the border of the USA and Canada. And she went, where are we? And I went, here. And while she was being read a story to, I was reading this paper about how pecans had just reached Canada. Anyway, I'm swinging my finger across the globe and going, shit, we're on the same latitude as Trent. So if pecans have reached Canada, they might reach southwest Devon. And literally that night when she'd fallen asleep, I went online and ordered some seedlings of pecans and planted a pecan orchard. And that's how honestly, all of this stuff was, and I can't underestimate the importance of this, there was so much play attached to it that I didn't think, why am I doing that? I just thought, if I work a little bit more, I can get a few extra quid to buy 40 pecans. And I'll get them in the ground and I'll see what happens. And it was just the best fun while throwing yourself at something that didn't really seem to have any meaning. I remember a friend Johnny going, what's the point of all of this? And the only thing I could answer was, look, I'm not sure there is a point. And if there is, I'm not really interested in it. all I'm interested in at the moment is the doing of it. It felt like I was being controlled almost, but it was such a celebration of, I don't know, I was working normal hours on other things for a lot of it, and just to be able to finance the whole thing. But yeah, it was complete joy, Mick. But that could be an allotment now. It's really not the scale. I've realised, because we've gone from that 17 acres to just a regular garden. And the pleasure and the joy is not reduced in any way at all, but it is different. And it's a different joy and a different pleasure. And I couldn't love it more.
Yeah. And I guess like much, the responsibility and the workload that comes with managing 17 acres, particularly when you're trying to do something. It'd be one thing if you were trying to grow, veg for a box scheme or whatever, but like growing those types of fruit and vegetables that are so new and innovative, like it must have been an extraordinary, tough, like heavy lift as well for you.
It was, but you know what? I was ready for that. I'd spent so much in my life without any direction or fire or oomph. It sort of caught hold of me, It really did. I don't know. I just felt like there was, without trying to sound like a backside, I just felt like I had sort of meaning in my life,
Yeah. What's your favorite veg from that time? Like what, or fruit? Is it the mulberry or the pecan, or what do you think?
It's really interesting that, because the mulberry is still to me the finest fruit in the world. It really is. But I remember sitting beneath a peach tree on a hot day, and I was sitting beneath it, and it was one of them glorious moments when your feet are in sun and the rest of you's in shade, And I'm lying there, I've just leaned back, and a peach fell off, and it hit me right where I didn't want it to.
Oh my God.
And I caught it in my lap, and I ate it. And honestly, it was more of a drink than anything else. And I still remember that peach, Mick. I still remember that peach. If you can catch a peach rather than pick it, there is virtually nothing to, a mulberry is, you know what it's like. You go through the veg year and you're convinced in May that there's nothing to touch asparagus. And then a couple of months later, you have your first cherry tomato off the tree. And that's the best thing in the world ever. And nobody can beat that. And then and on it goes through the year. And it's like that a little bit. So I would say tasting what was actually my first peach, I would say, rather than a kind of orange cricket ball that you normally get. It was just an extraordinary thing.
Isn't it mad though, like the fact that it literally fell onto your lap as an example of peak freshness compared to what the commercial food chain serves up? It's such a brilliant kind of juxtaposition of the two things, isn't it? Like it literally totally falls out of the sky.
Falls out of the sky. It felt like a gift, and it was just a joy. I mean, that you can get a day of Test cricket out of most supermarket peaches. You know what I mean? It's a different game.
Completely different, yeah. And like we always talk about in some of our courses and things, the sweet corn freshness, because again, sweet corn is one of those things I think that unless you've grown it yourself, you probably don't really know what it tastes like properly, or should taste like. It's like that old saying, you should run from the veg patch to the kitchen to get it into a pot of water, because it's literally deteriorating, within minutes, kind of. And the peach is the same, right?
They're different sides of the same 50p, Mick. It's the same with asparagus, same, all of that stuff. If you grow even a tiniest amount of food and it switches you on to where the rest of your food comes from, you're unlikely to be spending any more money than you previously were, but you're going to get it right in season and you're going to get all of that flavour. And it feels like a joke that you get let in on. It feels like you've heard the first Fleetwood Mac track that you previously didn't want to hear, and you're going, oh, I get this. And that's a terrible moment in lots of ways, because you'll suddenly feel like, oh, they were right all along. That veg is really life-changing.
It's a terrible moment, because once you go down the rabbit hole, I think you realise how crap the alternative is. That's very challenging, because it kind of drives you on then to go, well, if I'm going to eat, I may as well try and grow some food myself and have it always taste this good. That can be a hard taskmaster too, right?
Totally that, and a combination of, crikey, I've got to find people who grow this stuff well, because I maybe not in this, I haven't got the circumstances to grow all of the food myself. It's like when we met and I first became aware of what you were doing as GIY and kind of wider initiatives, I could not have been more bowled over by the fact not only that you were singing long and loud about all the right things, but that you were and continue to sing about it in a way that makes other people want to sing along, and that's a real gift, because no one ever got berated into doing something, you know what I mean? It just doesn't work. And that's why I couldn't have been more overjoyed to have kind of found you almost, because you were and you continue to do this stuff very differently. That does inspire people to see it not as a drag on their day, but as a life enhancer, as a life shifter. And we're on this planet, this is what fries my mind, Mick. We're briefly, randomly agglomerated atoms for such a tiny window of time. We're so very much sold how not to enjoy that experience to its fullest and its most life enhancing by people who want to take from us, that it becomes an act of kind of rebellion, of resistance to go, I'm going to eat food that will give me a longer, happier life. Like I say, I think you, GIY, do this better than anybody else, pushing people into the light.
Thank you for saying that. Look, let's switch gears again then to ask you, like, what have you got against marrows? You write in the book, a marrow is a torpedo of compost with no more business on a dinner plate than my old man's hanky. Like, that's a bit harsh. Come on.
No, it didn't, Mick.
Not that bad.
No, it's rotten. Everything about a marrow is rotten. So I'm going to come back. I'm going to come at this two ways, right? Number one, a marrow is just a massive courgette, right? And the trouble is, you've got to see yourself as the plant, Mick. A courgette plant will keep producing lots and lots of courgettes, right? If you pick them cigar-sized, they're delicious, amazing, wonderful, right? But you have to think of that courgette as a bottle of squash, right? All that flavour's in there. All you do by adding more water to it and growing it into a marrow is diluting that deliciousness, right? The second thing you're doing is you're forgetting what that plant's thinking. That plant is not thinking, oh, you know what, that Mick, he's a nice guy. And he's got a bit silvery. I feel a bit sorry for him, so I'm going to produce even more courgette. What that plant is doing is going, all I want to do is produce seed to become another series of plants.
Yeah.
So the way you keep it producing courgettes, obviously, is keep cutting small courgettes. Keep cutting small, delicious, delightful courgettes, right? And it will keep producing more because it's trying to produce seed. The minute that you let that thing become a marrow, the whole thing slows down because it's going, I've won here. This is going to be full of seeds, right? So you don't get any more food. You think you do because it's bigger. You don't, because you're missing all the little delightful, delicious courgettes. So you're punishing yourself. You're taxing yourself out of delightful food by growing this marrow. How do you make a marrow delightful? I'll tell you how you make a marrow delightful, Mick. It's by taking all the insides out and filling it with something delicious. It becomes a canoe that you filled with something delightful.
I thought you were going to say the way you make a marrow delightful is by fucking it on the compost heap and using it to grow other delicious food.
Yep. That is absolutely what you should do with a marrow, because otherwise, like I say, it's just an edible canoe for something that's delicious. That nobody wants to eat the marrow; they just want the filling. Okay, people don't like this advice, but it's proper advice, Mick. Once your courgette's got bigger than a proper fat, Sopranos cigar, chop it off, put it on the compost. It means that you'll get more delicious, lovely courgettes. Okay, you'll get more of what you were trying to grow. And all the nutrients from that will fall into the compost and become part of your other harvest.
That's fair. I think I probably agree with that. Although courgettes are such a formidable beast of a plant, like you go away for a weekend, you come back and there's a couple of marrows there unbeknownst to you. And, that's not my fault.
This is honestly...
Why are you judging me for
I'm going to judge you for this. Because this is the male problem, right? What we do is we go, right, there's me, my wife, a child or two. So one plant for each and one for the slugs is the rule, right?
Yeah.
And then you open the packet, you go, oh, there's 10 seeds in there.
Yeah, may as well.
I may as well say, yeah. And then you bug them out, and then lo and behold, of course, you haven't got round to harvesting, the 872 courgettes that are ready this week, and some of them turn it. So yes, Mick, I'm judging you.
Yeah, I've been known to wander the neighbourhood with bags of courgettes, lobbing them over walls and things.
Honestly, people shutting their doors, pulling their curtains across. Yeah. People getting, pots of warm pea ready to pour on you as you turn up at the door with your marrows.
What are you loving at the moment from your garden? What's harvesting in the Diacono household?
At the moment, there's a lot of really lovely things that are tiny but real shifters. So I grow a lot of unusual alliums. The one that I'm really loving at the moment is a Welsh onion, and it sort of looks like a kind of Arnie, it's kind of Schwarzenegger chive. It's got real the leaves coming up or whatever, but the flowers at the top are like, and you twist off the flowers, and you, like I say, you can use all of the plant and or leave the roots and it will just keep growing back. It's a perennial, it's a marvel. But you twist the flowers off the top and you break them up into these lovely little florets, and you scatter that over the top of anything, whether it's, I don't know, whether it's like a hominy pie that's in the book, or whether it's through a leafy salad. You throw them in and you get this kind of ping, ping, ping of onion flavour going on through all of it. And it's just a treat. So
that's great.
That one's big. I took a handful of the first. I did a bad thing, Mick, last night. I went out and just kind of had a little inquisitive feel around in the spuds, and they weren't quite ready, but I couldn't help but kind of pick 10 just from various plants, and just go, well, there's an orange one, there's a purple one, there's a, you know what, that just made me a very happy man.
Yeah, we've had new potatoes for about a week now. I've had them every night. I ate so many last night, I got a pain in my side from...
the spud stitch.
Exactly.
It's like being
exactly
sent out
what
for,
it was.
Yeah, it's like being sent, you're going, oh, that's what cross-country felt like. Oh.
Yeah. It was like for about 20 minutes I was in some severe pain, but like it was totally worth it.
Every
I'm
time.
do it again tonight. I haven't learned a thing.
Yeah, you get spud stitched tonight. Don't worry about him. He's just got spud stitch.
Oh, I love that, spud stitch. That's the phrase I've been waiting to hear all day. So yeah, like potatoes, obviously a big joy at the moment for sure.
Really.
I wanted to ask you on a more serious note, like, what's the commercial veg growing landscape like in England at the moment? Because here, like, it's on its knees in Ireland, and I'm wondering, is it peculiar to us, or what are you hearing?
I think it's very tough, and I think that for us, the joys of the sunlit uplands of Brexit, food-wise, have just been fields of stuff during those transition year or two, just going to rot because no one could pick it. There are a lot of chickens coming home to roost on the fact that our food security is dire, and people don't want to spend money on food. We've grown up not being used to paying for it. So it's tricky. I think there are a lot of, obviously, people do it brilliantly well, on a reasonable scale. The Riverfords of this world, do it brilliantly. But it is so much left with the innovators, it seems to me, the people who find ways of interestingly selling it to you, either through, the box scheme. It seems to me as popular as ever. But also, having to maybe have a venue where you're adding value to the produce. At least that's part of what you do, getting your brand out there, all of that stuff. I think we're in an awfully big period of transition. I'm hopeful. I think in 10 years we'll be back in Europe.
You think?
I do, yeah, I do. I think, there were arguments that could be made for leaving, none of which I agreed with, but you could argue that there were arguments, let's put it that way. And I didn't agree with them, but no one can say to me that the benefits of leaving the EU and all the things that it brought with it have been good to the UK in any way whatsoever. I think we'll have to face the truth about that, and I don't think there's the political climate to do it soon, and I don't think there are the individuals who are inspiring enough to tackle it. I think we got a tough decade, and then we'll be back in. Yeah,
we ordered, just as an FYI, we've got a refill store here in Grow HQ, and we ordered these luxury chocolates, like these absolutely amazing, like a really dark chocolate covered hazelnut, those kind of things that you can bring in your own container and fill up with them and stuff. They're gorgeous. But supplier was in the UK. We spent about £1,500 sterling on ordering these in bulk from the supplier, and the customs charge was €450 because they're a luxury good. We'll never be able to order them again. We should have probably known about customs charge before we ordered. That's a whole other day's work. But it struck me, like, for small food businesses, particularly in England, and it just must be so difficult.
It's mad. You can't send seeds, plants, anything even to Northern Ireland, to Ireland, anywhere. Everything about it. I'll shorten my life if I think too long about it. I do genuinely think in a decade we'll be back in, because there's no major benefit to have left, and there's so many obvious.
Yeah. I was reading this morning, actually, Irish families spend about 8% of their household income on food. In the UK, it's 12%, so you're a little bit better. but we're both lagging behind, like, you know, the France's and Spain and Italy, and I think Austria is maybe the best in the EU at around 35%. Why do you think that is? Like, why do we not? And it's a very unpopular sort of discussion to have, to suggest that people should pay, that this is about priority and people should spend more of their income on food. But like, why do you think we spend so little?
In my teens, Mick, I was a bit of a punk rocker, and I find myself heading back towards those kind of feelings. You know, this is all about vested interests, keeping us in certain positions, keeping us eating certain diets, to funnel the majority of our money into their pocket. You know, even something as seemingly harmless as a supermarket loyalty card is not there to give us rewards. It's to see how our behaviour can be affected by different actions that they take, with the aim being that we eat the same food week in, week out. If they organise it in the right way, if they put on certain offers that work, so that they minimise their overspend, you know, their over-ordering, and they maximise the efficiency with which it goes out. So if we eat the same thing every week, it's in their interest, and away we go. That's been backed up by all of the lobby groups that are connected to our food system. It won't change without organisations like GIY, waking people up at the ground level to the way that we are politicised quietly, without knowing it, into delivering our resources to those with power and those with money who want them. And I don't see it changing without more organisations like yourself, without some political will. That needs a figure. That needs a figure in power. It won't change. We can't change everything about the food system without imaginative thinking, without thinking that change is not only possible, it's the only thing we know happens, for God's sake. You know? You think about it, Mick, 30 years ago, the idea that I could watch the next England match on a train while heading from London, while it's happening on the other side of the planet, was science fiction 30 years ago. You know, and it's everyday part of our lives now. We have to be more imaginative about what we want from our government, what we want from our lives, what we want from the structures above government. In England, more than anywhere, we love to bow our head to the power. We love to nod to any form of power, Mick, and we just have to get a little bit more aware of what that costs us.
Yeah. But then, like, we're way over time, right? But I'm going to ask this question anyway. Then maybe we'll try and wrap things up. But like, you've had some very inspirational food leaders in the UK, like the likes of Hugh and Jamie Oliver, doing extraordinary work with campaigning work, you know? And yet it doesn't feel like the dial has moved all that significantly. So like, is it political leadership we need, or why is there that disconnect between that and the reality?
Subconsciously, I'm not sure that many people in the UK want to be told what to do by a white middle-aged bloke from Eton anymore, you know? So people aren't as interested in that as they might used to be, because we're in a different climate now. We've had enough of that kind of person. I think that it's very hard to make that connection with people in a time when you most need to, when there are wild state of the economy, people's ability to even cover the fundamentals of life, you know. I think that's really difficult. But I think also that it gets characterized like that we must keep eating not food, you know, highly processed stuff that isn't food, but counts as fuel, because that's the way to kind of tick the box and carry on. And God's sake, we have to think more interestingly and equitably about how we educate, what we make available, what we tax and what we don't tax, what we encourage and what we don't encourage, the political and economic incentives, as well as what we teach and encourage people from school all the way through. That's what we need to think about. It needs to be a bigger deal than the odd person making a noise.
Yeah, I hear you. So we have a closing tradition, Mark. I don't know if I told you about this, so you may not be very well prepared for this question, but that'll be all the more interesting, I think, where we ask people why food matters to them. Why does food matter to Mark Diacono?
Personally, Mick, I'm not convinced. I would say this about music as well. I'm not sure that I would have found any place for myself on the planet without it. You know, I had a long time with no direction, energy, impetus, sense, any of that stuff. And food gave me that. Music has done that for me. My wife and daughter have done that for me. But I don't think I have made proper kind of, big deal, center of my soul kind of connections with people, the planet, the weather, the seasons without food. It's just a brilliant, wonderful essential of life that makes sense of why you're here for a fleeting time, And I think once you get that, it's very hard to unget it. And, I feel connected with people who get it and who I've shared those times with. So it's very personal, but it's also very community based. Like if I run into you tomorrow, the fact that I might not have seen you for 5-6 years would matter not a bit. I could have seen you yesterday. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That to me is as big a deal as any part of the food thing.
It's a great connector, isn't it? A great.
Oh, it's all we're doing is actually seeing. You can feel like, that you've created it or something. It's like being able to see, I don't know, ultraviolet or something. We're seeing another part of the spectrum that's actually already there. It's just that it's hidden from us most of the time. And that is one of the joys about growing even a tiny bit of what you eat, is you suddenly see this great interconnectivity of which you are part, that you are literally in 50 years or 5 minutes going to become compost, and that's not a terrible thing.
Yeah. It's not a terrible thing. I keep telling my wife that she should turn me into compost at the end and sprinkle me around one of the fruit trees in the garden. She's surprisingly very up for the idea. So anyway, I totally agree with all of that. Mark, we're long overdue getting you back over to Ireland. You were a regular visitor there for a long time, and we'd love to have you back soon. And this book is extraordinary, as always. Everything you do is always so beautifully presented and written and interesting, and a unique take on things. Like there's over 100 vegetarian recipes in here, and it is absolutely beautiful. And I think at a time when we all need to be eating more plants for our own health and the health of the planet, this is the book that's needed right now. So hats off to you, and thanks a million for joining us. It's been a joy and a pleasure as always.
No, Mick, thank you. They're very precious words coming from you, and it's been a complete joy to have a chat with you.
Thanks a million. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care now.
That's it for this episode of Food Matters, but we would love you to get more connected to the GIY universe. So we believe that our food system is having a catastrophic impact on people's health and the health of our planet, and we think a movement of people growing some of their own food is the way to fix it. You can stay connected to GIY by signing up to our free newsletter and check out our full range of events, campaigns, resources and courses at giy.ie. Check out the show notes for more information. Thanks for listening, and see you soon.